Hola, buenos dias, and welcome to Cancun in Mexico. My name's Mark. This is Mark Philpott inside rugby, and in today's video I'm going to talk about whether or not the All Blacks are peaking too soon for the Rugby World Cup year. Now, if you're a rugby fan, I'm going to be covering all of the Rugby Championship final round. I'm going to be covering the warm-up games to this year's Rugby World Cup, and of course the Rugby World Cup itself. So right here on this channel, if you subscribe and give that little bell notification a beep, you will be notified every time I do a video about rugby this year. So there we go, we've got lots to look forward to, and today's topic I thought would be something interesting to talk about, whether or not the All Blacks are peaking too soon for this year's Rugby World Cup. Well, we're still around about 50 days away from the start of the Rugby World Cup 2023 in France, and I thought today we'd have a look at how teams are preparing themselves, in particular the All Blacks, in their preparation and getting that timing right. It's a pretty difficult thing to do for coaches and players to head into a World Cup season making sure that everybody is in optimal level of playing, and I think this is one of the many challenges that the teams playing in this year's World Cup will face. As I said, we're about 50 days away from the start of the tournament. Then you've got a tournament that lasts for 7 weeks. The first 4 weeks are the group stages or the pool stages, and then we go into the knockout competition. So coaches and players need to be on their game for a very extended period of time and making sure that their optimal level of performance is brought to every game. Throw in a couple of injuries, a bad game or two, and things will get very, very interesting. So looking at the All Blacks, there's no doubt that they've started off really well in this Rugby Championship competition this year. They are 2 wins for 2 games, and a decisive first half performances against both Argentina in Mendoza and against South Africa in Auckland last weekend. Some people in the media are suggesting that the All Blacks are a little bit further ahead than most of the other teams at the moment. I think that's a fairly subjective comment, but it could be seen that they are progressing well in their journey. So this whole thing about peaking for the World Cup, it's an interesting scenario, and if we look over the years, we've seen those teams that have been able to get it right, the All Blacks included in that group, but also South Africa, Australia and England. So there is some kind of formula needed to be successful at the Rugby World Cup. I think it's a really fine balance between getting things right in the Rugby Championship, which is obviously the time to try different combinations, making sure that your key players are fit but also playing well, and to get some general motivation and inspiration into the group of players. From there's going to be a selection for the World Cup group, and then those players are going to head off and start the tournament. So that's really phase 1 of the process, isn't it? Is making sure that we get through that initial phase, which in this case is the Rugby Championship competition. It's been interesting this year because a lot of people are saying, well, it doesn't really count in the bigger context of things because it is a Rugby World Cup year. I'm one of those people that says that. And then there's others that are saying, well, it is significantly important because it allows players to prepare themselves mentally and physically to get into the kind of shape to go up against the best rugby players in the world. So I think there's context on both sides. I don't think it's a black and white situation as far as that goes. Now, there's no doubt the All Blacks have started well in this journey, and if they're going to be there on October the 28th in the final, then like a lot of other teams, there's a lot of hurdles still to overcome. And there's no doubt that Ian Foster, Joe Schmidt and Jason Ryan are doing a great job at the moment in preparing that team for that particular journey. Now, so far in the Rugby Championship competition, the All Blacks have been able to demonstrate that high level of intensity in the first half of the 2 games that they've played so far. and they've also showed that intensity has dropped off a little bit heading into the second half, and that's been a combination of their own play as well as the competition has stepped up and really put it to them. Now we've got 1 week left, 1 round left in the Rugby Championship competition this year, and I think Foster and team will be looking at having an even more thorough test of the squad, as well as the intensity for the 80 minutes of the game. That's going to be important, I think, as they play Australia in Melbourne next weekend. Australia always brings out the best in the All Blacks, and I tend to think that this game next weekend is probably going to be the best benchmark for the All Blacks so far in the series after the first 2 games. And the reason I say that is because everybody now is expecting the All Blacks to win that game, I think, quite comfortably. And that's where the danger might be laying, because Eddie Jones and his group are getting fairly desperate in terms of getting some continuity into that team that's good enough for them to win matches against the best teams in the world. And Eddie Jones and his group will be absolutely focused on trying to do their best they can against the All Blacks. So the All Blacks are in a position where they've got to keep the intensity going, they've got to play well to beat the Wallabies, and they've got to keep that momentum that they've obviously got going now within the group, which I think is really, really important. So I think there's probably some markers that the coaching team of the All Blacks wanted to achieve by the end of the Rugby Championship, and after next weekend's game against the Wallabies, see whether or not they've achieved those markers that they wanted to achieve. And those markers could be things like having a group of players that's more or less the group that they want to take to the World Cup confirmed in their own minds. Those players, those key players playing well, those players that were under injury clouds, the Sam Whitelocks, the Will Jordans and so on, have come back into the team. Mark Talia have come back into the group and they're playing well. And I think that's the kind of trajectory that Foster and co would be looking for by the end of the Rugby Championship. Then we head over to England and play South Africa at Twickenham. Another encounter with the Box is going to be interesting, and I think, and I've said before in other videos, that I think that's going to be more of an exhibition game for both teams. It's too close to the World Cup for people to be all in, but at the same time it's not a game that you want to lose by 50 points, so we'll have to wait and see how that one turns out. And then we head into the World Cup properly, and what a start the All Blacks have against France. A monumentous occasion to kick off the 2023 Rugby World Cup, and I think that game against France is going to be psychologically very important for both teams, because first game of the World Cup for them, and getting off on the right foot is going to be really, really important. You know, we all know that France has been the All Blacks' nemesis in the past, and that game's going to be really, really important. So going through the group stages and then getting to the knockout phase, the All Blacks will be looking at trying to build their momentum. You know, those quarterfinals and semi-final games are going to be absolutely critical, as all games are going to be critical. You know, I wanted to make this video to see what you think out there as well, and obviously it doesn't apply just for the All Blacks, but the All Blacks have started off really strong in this Rugby Championship. We've got essentially 3 months until the end of the Rugby World Cup. Is it feasible to think that the All Blacks can keep growing the momentum, keep growing the squad throughout that whole period of time without having a hiccup somewhere that's going to cost them? So it's going to be really interesting, I think, to watch the trajectory of teams heading into this year's World Cup. We're going to be having the warm-up games, some of the European teams soon. I'm going to be covering those here on this channel, so make sure that you hit the subscribe button, please, and the little bell notification also helps you to be notified when I put a video up. So the All Blacks on a good path so far. I think we're going to see a lot more answers next weekend against the Wallabies. I think that game's important, again, as I say, from a psychological point of view, and if they have a solid win in that game, there's no doubt the confidence that they will have after winning the Rugby Championship, taking that momentum into the beginning of the World Cup is going to be a good thing. I think I'd rather be going into the World Cup in that scenario than maybe what Eddie Jones is facing next weekend. We're going to some venues in France to play in these 9 different venues in the World Cup that some of these players haven't played at before. I don't think that's going to be a significant factor. It's all about the group and how the group have come together and stayed together, and that's what creates momentum in teams. And being able to hold that momentum for a set period of time, in this case over the next 3 months, is a really difficult thing to do. So we're going to see what teams are going to be able to peak at that critical phase of the Rugby World Cup as we go forward. So I don't think the All Blacks have peaked too soon at all. I think that the All Blacks are on a great upward trajectory. They need to keep that momentum going, and I think Foster and co are going to be looking for that momentum to continue against the Wallabies. I think it's just as an important match as the other 2 have been for them to really able to assess where the group's at, what players are having some consistency in their form, and making sure that those critical positions that they've still got question marks over are going to be answered for those first games in the Rugby World Cup. And again, selecting the team for those first games in the Rugby World Cup is going to be important for later on in the competition if the All Blacks are making it through to that knockout stage as we expect them to do. I think another element that's important in terms of peaking for a tournament like the Rugby World Cup is the pool stage of the tournament. It gives the coaches and the teams another opportunity to build into the tournament when you're playing a couple of the lesser sides, and I don't want to undermine any of the teams in the Rugby World Cup. They've all earned their place to be there, and you know, we are seeing the best rugby teams in the world playing in this year's Rugby World Cup. So I do think though that pool stage allows teams to gain a little bit of momentum if they have had a bad game on the way into the Rugby World Cup. And a bad game for me would be obviously Australia beating New Zealand, maybe Argentina upsetting South Africa, and therefore those teams would have to reset and come back with a strong opening into the World Cup. New Zealand's challenge is that they have France in the first game, so they have to be dialed in right from the very beginning, because I think that's going to set the tone for the tournament if they have a really good game against France. So there you go, there's my view. I think the All Blacks haven't peaked too soon. I think they're on a great trajectory. They've played well in both games so far. There's obviously things that can be improved, and I want to thank a lot of you for your constructive comments about how you've seen the All Blacks so far. The full 80 minutes of intensity yet. They've played well enough to win, which is obviously the important thing, but there's always room for improvement. So we'll see whether or not that improvement continues against Australia and they're able to come out and play 80 minutes of good intensity of rugby. I expect to see probably a couple of new faces in that All Black team as well. I'm going to be making videos, preview videos on all of the games coming up next weekend in the final round of the Rugby Championship for 2023. Make sure you're dialed into this channel, and you'll be able to see what my predictions are for next weekend. We'll also be going through each of the teams when they're named to find out what positional changes the coaches have made for this last round of the Rugby Championship. And then we're going to head into the warm-up game. So we're getting closer, folks. It's getting more and more exciting. As I say, we're only around 50 days away from the start of the Rugby World Cup for 2023, and it's still all to play for, that's for sure. So listen, thanks very much for watching my videos. Tell me what you think about this situation. Do you think the All Blacks are on the right trajectory? It doesn't matter whether you're a Kiwi or not. We're all part of the rugby family. You've got your opinion. I'd like to hear it. Do you think they're building as good as any other team or better than any other team at the moment? And do you think they're going to be there in the later stages of the Rugby World Cup when it really counts, because they can hold and continue to build this momentum? Love to hear your comments below in this video. Okay, that's it for me. Time to keep going for a walk, and I'll see you all again soon here on Inside Rugby. Until then, stay well, stay healthy, and enjoy your rugby, people. Enjoy your rugby. See you soon.